Welcome to Paskvan Podcasts. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Okay, let's picture this. February 25th, 1957. It's bitterly cold out in Fox Chase, Philadelphia. It's that kind of quiet, edge of the city place, where the woods are still kind of pushing back against the suburbs.
Exactly. Not the kind of place you expect secrets, but maybe the kind of place secrets can hide. We're talking Susquehanna Road.
Yeah.
More like a dirt track back then. Pretty isolated.
And this young guy, he's just out checking his rabbit traps, simple stuff, but then he finds this box, a big cardboard box pushed into the undergrowth.
Yeah, not just any box either. It's a J.C. Penney box.
Yeah.
The kind that originally held a baby's bassinet, which is already strange, right?
And inside,
Yeah.
wrapped in this cheap sort of frayed plaid blanket, that's where he found him, the boy.
The shock was immense. I mean, the reports say the young man was so disturbed he actually left. Didn't even report it until the next day. He just couldn't process it right then.
And when the police finally got there, the scene, it was grim.
Oh, absolutely horrifying. The official reports, they note the boy was naked. He was terribly emaciated, weighed under 30 pounds. I mean, for a kid maybe 4 or 5 years old, that's severe neglect.
And signs of abuse too, right? Bruises.
Yes, multiple bruises, old scars. The officers described him almost like a broken doll, just utterly tragic. The body itself told a story of prolonged suffering.
And that discovery kicked off this massive 65-year mystery. It wasn't just about finding a killer. It was about finding out who this child was. This whole story is defined by silence.
A total wall of silence.
So today we're going to try and follow that thread, look at the initial investigation, how chaotic it was, explore the theories that cropped up over the years, and then get into the science, the breakthrough that finally gave him his name back.
Because that's the thing, right? Usually a case starts with a name, an identity. This one started backwards. They had the crime, the body, but the victim. He was a ghost.
Let's start right there with what they did know, the autopsy. What could they tell from the body itself?
Well, the medical examiner put his age somewhere between 3 and 7. They leaned towards maybe 4 or 5 years old. Height, about 3.5 feet.
And the cause of death was clear.
Yes. Blunt force trauma to the head. A violent end. But, like we said, the overall condition.
Yeah.
The malnutrition, the old injuries. That spoke to a much longer period of abuse, systematic neglect.
But there were also these really specific, almost contradictory clues, weren't there? Things that suggested someone at some point had actually cared for him or at least gotten him medical attention.
Right. The scars.
Yeah.
That was the really puzzling part. They found several.
Can you walk us through those? Because they seem so significant, proof he wasn't always hidden.
Definitely. There were 3 main ones investigators focused on. One was under his chin. Could have been a small surgery, maybe just a stitched-up cut from an accident,
Okay.
Then there was a more noticeable one on his left ankle. Looked like a healed injury, something that probably needed setting or at least proper bandaging. It wasn't fresh.
Suggesting some kind of medical intervention happened in the past?
Exactly. But the most telling scar was in the groin area. The ME was pretty certain this pointed towards actual surgery, probably for something like a hernia repair, which isn't uncommon in young kids.
Wait a second. If he had surgery, especially something like a hernia repair, wouldn't that leave a paper trail? Hospital records, admission forms.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? That's what investigators hoped. But you have to remember 1957 record-keeping was, well, it was paper. Files and cabinets, specific to each hospital. There was no central database, no easy way to search across a city, let alone the state or country.
So they'd have to guess which hospital, what year.
Precisely. They'd need to physically go through potentially thousands of records in dozens of institutions looking for a match to a description or a specific procedure. Without knowing where to start, it was like finding a needle in a haystack made of paper. A near impossible task back then.
Okay, so the scars were a frustrating hint of a history they couldn't access. What else stood out?
His hair. It was odd. It had been cut very recently, but really crudely. Choppy, uneven, like someone took a pair of dull scissors and just hacked away at it.
Why would someone do that?
The immediate thought was disguise. A panicked, last-minute attempt to change his appearance, maybe make him harder to recognize, either right before or right after he died.
Which suggests the killer knew him, right? This wasn't random.
It feels very personal, very intimate. Not the act of a stranger trying to dispose of a body quickly, but someone trying to erase the boy's identity itself. Someone close.
So police have these clues. The scars, the hair, the abuse. They run the standard procedures for the time. Fingerprints.
Took them. Compared them against every database they had access to, state, federal, nothing. Zero matches.
Meaning?
Meaning he'd never been fingerprinted before, never arrested, never processed through any official system that took prints. And importantly, he wasn't listed in any missing children files they could access.
Dental records.
Same problem. They recorded the details of his teeth, but without any prior dental records on file anywhere to compare them to, it was useless for identification. From an official standpoint, this child simply didn't exist.
Now let's circle back to the discovery site itself. You mentioned the young man waited a day. What happened when the police did arrive? Was the scene preserved?
Oh, not even close. By 1957 standards, it was chaos. Remember, no yellow tape, no strict access control like we see today. The second word got out, the place was just overrun.
By who?
Detectives, sure, but also reporters swarming for the story, curious neighbors. Everyone was just trampling around the area where the box was found.
So potential evidence just gone.
Absolutely. Think about it. February, maybe patches of snow or soft earth, any potential tire tracks from a vehicle used to dump the box, obliterated by countless footprints, any unique soil disturbance around the box, trampled flat.
Fibers. Hairs.
Potentially compromised. The box itself, the blanket inside, handled by the discoverer, then likely multiple officers before being carefully bagged by forensics. Any trace evidence was at high risk of contamination or simply being lost in the confusion. It was the nature of policing back then, but it definitely didn't help.
It's just incredible. They have the body, the box, the blanket, clear signs of horrific abuse. But the biggest obstacle is just silence. Nobody, anywhere, reported this specific child missing.
And that right there is what made this case so fundamentally different. Normally, you start with who. Who was the victim? That leads you to their life, their connections, potential suspects. Here they had the what, the murder, but no who. They weren't just hunting a killer, they were desperately hunting for a name.
It forces you to think, doesn't it? For a child to vanish so completely, for no parent, no relative, no neighbor, nobody to sound the alarm, it suggests something deeply hidden, something calculated.
It really does. It points towards an effort to erase his very existence.
Faced with this total lack of leads from standard methods, the Philadelphia police decided they had to do something drastic, something unprecedented for the time.
They realized their only real clue, the only thing that might spark recognition, was the boy's face itself. But obviously, post-mortem photos are difficult.
So they made this controversial decision. They cleaned him up. They tried to style his hair, the crudely cut hair, as best they could. And they posed him basically head and shoulders, trying to create an image that looked, well, as close to life as possible under the circumstances.
It was a huge gamble, ethically and emotionally. But they were absolutely desperate. They needed something, anything, to break through that wall of silence. The hope was that someone, somewhere, maybe a neighbor who only saw him occasionally, a shopkeeper, a distant relative, would see that face and recognize him.
And the way they distributed this photo, it wasn't just a notice in the paper, was it?
Oh, no, this was a full-scale media saturation campaign, unlike anything really seen before for this kind of case. They put that haunting little face everywhere.
The way where specifically?
Posters plastered on lampposts, in shop windows, post offices, big billboards on major roads coming into and out of Philly. And maybe the most striking tactic.
Utility bills.
Yeah. They included his picture and a plea for information right inside the gas and electric bills, sent out to thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of homes across the city.
Imagine opening your bill and seeing that face staring back at you. The psychological impact must have been enormous.
Exactly. He became instantly known, not by name, of course, but as the boy in the box. His image was seared into the public consciousness of Philadelphia, a symbol of this terrible unsolved tragedy.
But even with this massive, citywide, emotionally charged campaign, what happened? Did it work?
It generated a lot of activity. The police phone lines were jammed for weeks, months, even. Hundreds and hundreds of calls came in.
Tips, leads.
Sort of. Mostly theories, sightings that didn't quite match up, sometimes cruel hoaxes, and sadly, many calls from people desperately hoping the boy might be their own missing child. Detectives chased down every single one, compared descriptions, checked timelines, interviewed people.
And the result?
Nothing. Every lead evaporated. Every potential match turned out to be incorrect. They compared his details against every known missing child's case in the region, then nationally. No matches. It was incredibly frustrating.
What about those parents who came forward hoping he was theirs?
That was just heartbreaking for everyone involved. Parents would travel to Philly, sometimes see the photographs, sometimes even view the body itself full of this awful hope, and then realize instantly that it wasn't their son.
Which, in a way, just made the mystery deeper, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It hammered home the fact that this boy wasn't just missing in the usual sense. His disappearance seemed orchestrated to prevent him from being found or identified. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one was looking for him.
So the police threw everything they had at it, used this unprecedented public campaign, and still nothing. They were stuck.
Completely stuck. Despite the massive effort, the intense media focus, the core problem remained. This child had no name, no known history, and nobody stepping forward to claim him. The silence was deafening.
And when you have a vacuum of facts like that, speculation rushes in to fill it. What were people saying back then in the late 50s? What were the early theories?
Well, they mostly revolved around how a child could just disappear from the records. One idea was that he was an unrecorded foster child, maybe lost in a poorly managed system, and his death was covered up institutionally.
Or an orphan nobody was tracking closely.
Right. Another strong theory was shame. That he was perhaps an illegitimate child, and his existence was hidden, then erased, because of the social stigma back then.
And the idea he wasn't even from Philadelphia.
That gained traction, too. That maybe he was brought from another state, dumped in Fox Chase, specifically because it was far from where anyone might recognize him or where local records might exist.
These weren't just abstract theories, though. They affected the community. Right. People were scared.
Oh, definitely. When there are no answers, fear grows. Rumors started about shady institutions, maybe about immigrant families hiding secrets, about local scandals nobody wanted exposed. Parents held their kids tighter. The unknown nature of the crime made it feel like a threat that could be anywhere, could involve anyone. It tapped into a deep anxiety about vulnerable children just vanishing.
So the years turn into decades. The initial frenzy dies down, the case goes cold, but it never fully disappears from the minds of investigators or the public. Did any leads persist?
Well, certain lines of inquiry lingered, mostly because of geography. The most prominent one for years, really decades, was the foster home theory.
Right, you mentioned a foster home was very close to where the box was found.
Exactly, just a short distance away. That proximity alone kept suspicion focused on it for a very long time. Police couldn't just ignore that.
Were there other reasons besides just being nearby?
There were rumors and some allegations circulating in the community about harsh discipline, maybe even neglect, at that particular home. It painted a picture where it was plausible a child could be abused there, die, and then be disposed of quickly and locally.
So what did investigators do? Did they ever find anything concrete linking the boy to that home?
They tried, repeatedly, over many years. Different detectives would revisit it. They searched property records, tried to track down staff who worked there in the 50s, look for any child admission or departure records that might fit his description or timeline. But nothing solid ever emerged. The record-keeping from that era, especially for private or semi-private institutions, was often incomplete. They couldn't find any definitive proof, no witness who remembered him, no document, no physical evidence linking him to that specific foster home. It remained this nagging possibility, this shadow, but they could never prove it.
Another dead end, essentially.
A persistent, frustrating dead end.
Then, much later, we jump forward to the early 2000s, technology is starting to change, but before DNA really cracks it, there's this other potential breakthrough. The Martha confession. That must have seemed huge at the time.
It was electrifying. Imagine, decades into this cold case, a woman comes forward. The media called her Martha to protect her identity, and she tells this incredibly detailed, horrific story.
What did she claim?
She claimed her own mother, who she described as extremely abusive, had actually bought the boy from his biological parents, that he lived with Martha's family right there near Fox Chase. She said he endured constant, terrible abuse from the mother and eventually was beaten to death.
And that her mother dumped the body?
Yes. She claimed her mother forced her to help dispose of the body in the woods in that JCPenney box.
Wow. I mean, that sounds incredibly specific. Did she offer details that weren't public knowledge, things that made police think, okay, this could be real?
She did. And that's what made it so compelling initially. She apparently described the specific plaid pattern of the blanket he was wrapped in. And crucially, she talked about the weird, hacked-off haircut, claiming her mother did it right before disposing of the body to make him harder to identify. These weren't details widely circulated in the press over the years. It suggested genuine inside knowledge.
So why didn't it stick? Why wasn't that the answer?
Credibility and corroboration. As investigators dug deeper, serious questions arose about Martha's reliability. They interviewed other family members, people who knew her, and some suggested she had a history of, well, maybe embellishing things or had mental health issues that made her account questionable.
So her testimony was shaky. Could they verify any of the external facts she claimed?
That was the other problem. They tried to corroborate her timeline, her family's movements, whether they owned a car that could have been involved, if neighbors rumored a boy matching the description living there. They just couldn't find enough independent evidence to back up her specific claims about the purchase, the abuse, and the disposal.
It must have been a massive disappointment.
Huge. To have a confession with such seemingly damning details fall apart under scrutiny, it was another painful blow in a case full of them. Her story was ultimately set aside as unproven.
So with the foster home theory stalled and the Martha confession discredited, the mystery just kept growing. And as more time passed, the theories got even, well, wilder, didn't they?
They did. When logical, local explanations fail time and time again, people start looking for bigger, more sinister answers. You started hearing speculation about things like organized human trafficking rings, theories about the boy being used in some kind of unregulated medical experiment, even far-fetched links to organized crime.
Basically, the less evidence you have, the more room there is for imagination to run wild.
Exactly. These theories were born out of the sheer frustration and the maddening lack of concrete answers after so many decades.
And during these decades of frustration, something important happened symbolically, didn't it? Regarding where the boy was buried.
Yes, that's a really significant part of the story, showing how much the case resonated. Initially, back in '57, since he was unidentified, he was buried in the city's Potter's Field, a pauper's grave. Just a simple marker that read, America's Unknown Child.
But that changed.
It did. In 1998, thanks to the efforts of dedicated citizens, retired police officers who had worked the case, and community donations, his body was exhumed. They moved him from that anonymous grave to a proper plot in Ivy Hill Cemetery. There was a ceremony, a new headstone.
What did that move signify?
It was a powerful statement. Showed the city, the community hadn't forgotten him, that they were taking ownership of this tragedy. He wasn't just an unsolved file number anymore. He was officially recognized, even in death, as America's unknown child, a symbol for all forgotten victims. And crucially, that exhumation had a practical purpose, too.
Right, because 1998, DNA technology was starting to become a real tool in forensics.
Exactly. That exhumation wasn't just symbolic. It was strategically vital. Even though DNA tech was still developing rapidly and the databases weren't what they are today, the investigators had the incredible foresight to preserve biological samples from his remains during that process.
So they basically put his genetic code on ice, hoping science would eventually catch up.
That's precisely what they did. They collected tooth and bone samples, knowing that somewhere in that material was the key to his identity, even if they couldn't unlock it in '98. They were playing the long game, betting on future science. And thank goodness they did.
Because that bet eventually paid off dramatically in the late 2010s, thanks to the rise of investigative genetic genealogy. Can you explain how that works differently from, say, the police DNA databases like CODIS?
Sure. CODIS compares crime scene DNA directly against profiles of known offenders already in the system. Investigative genealogy is different. It takes the unknown DNA profile in this case from Joseph's preserved samples and uploads it to public, commercial ancestry databases, the kind people use to trace their family trees like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe, though investigators typically use specific portals like GED Match or Family Tree DNA that allow law enforcement searches under strict rules.
So you're not looking for the person themselves, but relatives.
Exactly. You're looking for distant cousins, maybe second, third, fourth cousins, even further removed people who share small segments of DNA because they have common ancestors way back. Once you find those distant matches, the real work begins for the genealogists.
Which involves building family trees.
Massive, complex family trees. They start with those distant cousins and work backwards, generation by generation, using birth records, death certificates, marriage licenses, census data, obituaries, anything they can find. They're looking for the point where these different family lines intersect the common ancestral couple.
That sounds incredibly labor-intensive, especially with a sample that was over 60 years old by then.
It's unbelievably difficult. First, extracting usable DNA from such an old, degraded sample is a huge challenge. Remember, the body was exposed, then buried, then embalmed, then exhumed. The DNA was fragmented. Early attempts, I think, using mitochondrial DNA didn't yield enough specific information.
Mitochondrial DNA only traces the maternal line, right?
Not specific enough for this. They needed nuclear DNA, the full genetic blueprint. Scientists had to use advanced techniques, basically piecing together tiny fragments, SMP analysis it's called, to build a complete enough profile that could actually be compared in the genealogy databases. That process alone took a couple of years of dedicated lab work.
And once they finally had that usable profile, around 2019, the genealogist stepped in. How long did their part take?
That took another 3 years, roughly. It's meticulous, painstaking detective work, just using historical records instead of shoe leather. They found these distant cousin matches, then built out these enormous family trees, tracing thousands of individuals.
Trying to narrow it down.
Exactly. They worked forward from the common ancestors they identified, tracking all the descendants generation by generation, looking for a family line that eventually led to the Philadelphia area around the right time period, the early 1950s.
So it wasn't just biology, it was intense historical research.
Absolutely. A combination of cutting-edge science and old-fashioned genealogical legwork. They eventually zeroed in on a specific family line with roots in the West Philadelphia suburbs. It confirmed he was local, not brought in from elsewhere.
And after all that work, 65 years of questions.
They found him. In December 2022, the Philadelphia authorities held a press conference. They announced they had finally identified America's unknown child. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli.
Joseph Augustus Zarelli.
Born January 13, 1953. He was just 4 years old when he died.
Hearing the name after all that time, the impact must have been immense.
It was incredibly emotional. You saw footage of retired detectives, guys who'd carried this case with them for their whole careers, finally getting that piece of the puzzle. Giving him his name back felt like restoring his dignity, his humanity. The symbol became a real person.
But as you mentioned earlier, identifying him wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it just opened up a whole new set of painful questions.
Precisely. Knowing his name didn't solve the crime. It just redirected the focus. Now the questions became, who were his parents? Why did they never report him missing? Did they know about the abuse? Were they involved? If Martha's story about him being purchased had any truth to it, who sold him? And crucially, who inflicted the injuries that killed him?
The authorities were clear about that when they announced his name, weren't they?
Yes, very clear. They emphasized this was, quote, closure of identity, not closure of justice. Identifying Joseph wasn't the end of the investigation. It was the beginning of a new, much more targeted phase.
So the cold case, in that moment, became an active homicide investigation focused on his family circle.
Exactly. Now, they had names, family connections, a history to investigate. The search wasn't for a ghost anymore. It was for the specific individuals responsible for the life and death of Joseph Augustus Zarelli.
Looking back, Joseph's story, his case, it had a ripple effect far beyond just Philadelphia, didn't it?
Oh, definitely. Even back in the 50s, the sheer horror and mystery of it raised public awareness about child abuse and neglect, about kids who could fall through the cracks. It arguably influenced how police departments handled missing children cases and how they engaged the public moving forward.
And the recent identification.
That's become a landmark case for forensic genealogy. It demonstrated very powerfully that even decades-old cases with degraded evidence, are potentially solvable with this technology and enough persistence. It validates the work of those investigators back in '98 who had the foresight to preserve that evidence. It gives hope for countless other cold cases.
It feels like his story endures because it touches on something fundamental, that refusal to let a child be forgotten.
Absolutely. For 65 years, people refused to give up on him. Investigators, genealogists, the community members who tended his grave, they kept his memory alive.
Yeah.
Giving him his name back was, in a way, an act of defiance against the idea that any child could just be thrown away and erased. It affirmed his value, his personhood.
But the final sobering thought remains.
It does. Joseph Augustus Zarelli has his name. He has his dignity restored, but the people responsible for his suffering, for his death, their identities, at least publicly, are still unknown. The police know who they are investigating within his family circle, but the final chapter, the chapter about justice for Joseph that's still being written, the silence surrounding the killers is the silence that remains to be broken.